So I'm Laura Donnelly, and I'm a member of the National Council. I was on the board like 100 years ago. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to the Summer Series program today to hear from Elliott Hundley about his absolutely wonderful process as an artist. So we'll get to that really quickly. They told me to say I'm a LA collector. So that's not really true. I'm a recovering collector. I run the board of the Institute of Contemporary Art, LA. I live here and in LA, I should say that. And I am very, very passionate about artist process. I always have been, much more so than owning art or whatever. So many years ago, about 35 years ago, I started an organization called Art Matters that funds artists. And we're still doing it 35 years later, so something's right. They're very small grants, but the artists are really terrific. We have a great time doing it. So I want to say that I've been a fan of Elliott's work for a very long time, specifically because I think his process is so fascinating. I'm not going to tell you a whole bunch about it because he's here to do that. I don't need to do that. But I want to say that he is like, for me, a miner, as in he goes into the mine and he finds all these amazing bits of material, objects, images, and then he weaves these installations and collages that speak so deeply of, for me, memory and mythologies, and both ancient and contemporary. I tend to kind of fall into his pieces. I kind of start and I just fall into them and I can't leave them very soon, so you'll see why. Let's see. The other thing I was going to say about him before I step away is that I don't really know Elliott personally very well, but we're becoming friends, I think. And the thing that I do know about him, even though nobody has actually told me this, is that he is incredibly kind. He's incredibly generous to his artist community and to others. And, you know, that's a really rare quality for an artist, I have to say. I know a lot of artists. A lot of them, you know, they're kind of offish, they don't come out a lot into their community, and there are some that really, really do. And LA is an amazing artist community, I have to say that. But I know this about Elliott. I wanted to read you a piece that Gary Garrels, who is a very wonderful curator who was at the Hammer Museum, he's now at SF MoMA, wrote about Elliott when he curated a show in, I think, 2005, 6, something like that. So this is so much more eloquent than I could possibly summons. Hundley's compositions are delicately balanced and formally elaborate. The ghosts of Robert Rauschenberg's combines permit these constructions. Color shifts between flamboyant and subtle, from intensely saturated to whispered tonalities. Textures may be very tender and silken to the prickly and menacing. Gravity is defied and exposed. In Hundley's assemblages, time, ancient and contemporary, spills forward and backward, one condition fusing into the other, a state of grace. Before the fall remains an echo, a still palpable, presence against the cacophony of history. So, a little bit about, that's pretty amazing, isn't it? I think it is. Most recently, Elliott was awarded the 2019 Guggenheim Fellowship, and he had two exhibitions. One of them is currently still up, but he had a really wonderful exhibition at Regan Projects. And currently, he is the inaugural artist to what I call mine, the collection of the Museum of Contemporary Art in LA. And this is a project that they're going to be doing as part of their 40th anniversary, and there are a number of artists in line to do that. But it's a really special, I think a wonderful thing for an artist to do, and a privilege in some respects, but also a real contribution to the community of people who want to see the collection, and very often never do. I mean, there are many, many pieces in Mocha's collection that never get seen. And what did you say, 7,000 something?
7,500 works.
Yeah.
And in the show of 40 pieces, half of which have never been on view before.
Okay. So it's called Open House. It's still open till the 19th of September or something like that. If you get to LA, you should really, really definitely go. It's a very, I found it very moving. It's a lot about collage, but then he throws in other things that really are about assemblage, and they're just beautiful. I think the one that just knocked my socks off was Betty Saar. It's a wonderful, wonderful piece. So anyway, I'm going to just tell you briefly about the museums where he's in the permanent collections. The Hammer, the Istanbul Museum of Modern Art, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, Louisiana Art Museum in Denmark, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Nasher Sculpture Center, Solomon Guggenheim Museum in New York, the Walker Art Center, Whitney Museum of American Art, and I think there are probably quite a few more. So I just want to close by thanking the people who've really put this program together. I want to thank presenting sponsor Toby Devane Lewis, who I don't know that she's here, Ulite Arts, and others who are making this event possible include the summer series sponsor Douglas Elliman, Real Estate, Christie's Auction House, and Cultured Magazine. And then, of course, all of you who support the programming here and the mission of Anderson Ranch. So please, Elliott.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for having me. This is like such a lovely place. I got to tour in the last day, and like, I don't use the word magical lightly, but it's so creative, and it's wonderful to be here. So I'm going to prepare you a little bit for the style of lecture that I'm going to give, because it's a little unorthodox. So I have way too many images, and I'm not the kind of person that likes to speak a lot, so I'm going to go through them very quickly. And I thought, actually going through them very quickly, it may frustrate some of you because like the images are very dense, but I thought that it actually is a close approximation to what it's like to be physically with these works of art, because there's so much information in them and it's so layered that you could never actually analyze or remember what you're seeing before you walk away. So I'm happy to go back if anybody wants me to, but I am going to try to make it fast. And I'm also going to only talk about certain bodies of work, and then let other bodies of work, I'll just go through them without much explanation. As I thought last night about sort of preparing this narrative and how you tell us, because in a way it's like the story of my life, the story of making these things. I thought about, there's a playwright and poet and artist Antonin Artaud, who's a surrealist, and he wrote a screenplay for film in the 20s or 30s it's a 2-hour screenplay, but it only depicts the last 18 seconds of a man's life before he dies. But it takes 2 hours to show all of the images that would flash through his head. And I think, in a way, like, this is kind of like what will play in the last 18 seconds of my life. When I was young, I made straight gestural abstraction, and this is an example of that. So it's straight oil paint, and it was all about trying to record movement and gesture. But I was like, quickly understood that no one saw these paintings the way that I did, and I needed and had a real desire to incorporate, to tether that to my reality and the politics and community that I live in and the history around me, beyond just abstraction. And around that time, I started, and I didn't want to learn. I thought it was really laborious to go. I knew how to paint and draw, but I knew that my ideas were moving so quickly that I thought it would be more expedient to use photography. So I started photographing the people that I love and cutting those photographs out and building these little diorama around them. So as a way, and I would reprint them, destroy the diorama and then reprint them as like little note card size pictures. And they were like a way to make paintings really quickly. But then it didn't satisfy me because it wasn't painterly enough. So I took all that material and started gluing it directly onto the paper and building landscapes out of all those pictures of the figure. This is called Alessandra Seated, and actually all of the poses are from the Villa of Mystery cycle in Pompeii. So it was just a way for me to, in reenacting an ancient work of art, which is about 2,000 years old, begin to understand it. It's about 4 by 4 feet. And then that grew, so then I just wanted to like do it on a bigger scale, do more of it. So I tore up a sketchbook, and this is about 7 by 7 feet, and each square is a panel in the sketchbook. And then when I made that last piece, I realized that in gluing something down, I took the power away from the sculptural act, the gestural act of cutting it out and excising it from its context. So then I decided to just pin them together instead of glue them together. So all those figures of me and people I know are just pinned really loosely to this foam and building gestural landscapes. And then those became more elaborate. This is called a clearing. It's from about 20 years ago. And this is a touchstone for me. And the last exhibition I made at Regan Projects is replicating this 4 by 4 foot work from 20 years ago and blowing it up into a whole show. And then this piece is called Cave. It's about 5 by 5 feet and a foot deep. I thought, well, why am I even bothering pinning it to foam? Like, the foam doesn't mean anything to me. So I just started pinning everything onto itself and building these sort of sculptural nets that were like drawings in space. This is called Cave. And it's actually made of mini blinds. And this is, Patty Wickman is here, who is a professor of mine who will remember that this I made in my studio when she was my teacher. Basically, this was a painting that was the size of the wall of my studio. So rather than concern myself with making pictures or thinking about composition or formalism, I decided to simply cover the entire space and not give myself a time limit, and at the end of the year, allow it to be a work of art without exerting control over it. And it's about 8 feet by 16 feet, a foot deep. It's kind of like an altar. And then that summer, I decided to do the opposite. And I wanted to, basically, I found about 100 old landscape paintings, and I decided to cut them up and reassemble them into a giant inverted landscape, and to make an image that was a counterpoint to the one that we just saw, that was like highly structured, highly formal, very tight. And you'll see this is kind of the way that I work. It's almost like fake science, like control and variable. This is a collage, and I included this work because it was...
I have a question.
Yeah. Oh, and please ask questions. I'll repeat them so everyone can hear. So in an experiment, the way I think about it is there's certain things you know and certain things you don't know. So basically, I would try to take stock of all that I knew in a certain moment, and then think, well, like for example, a really clear example is the getting rid of the foam. I thought, well, I can make this piece, but without this one element. And what will it do if I remove that one element? And then I see what I have. And then when that work is complete, repeat that process. So it's almost like the moving from one work to another is almost like an animation of my thinking. And this work is about 7 by 7 feet, but I was actually extracting and removing, cutting holes in it as a way to try to make meaning through subtraction. And then I thought, well, these works on paper could also be more sculptural and three-dimensional because they didn't have the pens. So I thought, what was a way to physically engage with the body? So I started making kites. This is called lure. And then taking those wall pieces and mounting them on like an easel or, in this case, just an armature. Because I could feel myself, this desire to like slide off the wall and move onto the floor. This is called bell glass. This is called monument. And it's just a kite. And I like the idea of kind of critiquing a monument and like an anti-monument and making something that, because all of this work is ephemeral, it's slight, it's changing, it becomes discolored. So it's a way to acknowledge time and like making a monument that you could like fly as a kite until it crashed and destroyed itself. And there's reliquaries, me. Bigger kite. This is called Proscenium. So figuring out ways to make two-dimensional works that could be like theatrical. So I envision this as like the wall that divides the theater from the audience.
That's beautiful.
Thank you. And I also wanted, these works feel like they've been through something beyond just me making them, but like this one is called Fire, which is kind of an invitation to burn it. I was thinking of Rauschenberg's combines and Calder's mobiles, and each of them came up with a term to justify a new hybrid form. So this is my combine mobile to burn. And then finally, I really wanted to make a sculpture, and I wanted to do something on the floor, so I bundled all of the failed sculpture that I had made and called it The Wreck. And all of this, too, is pinned together. It's like an elaborate ikebana. This I conceived of as a funerary wreath turned on its side. And then when you see it from the front, even though it's like 7 or 8 feet long, it collapses and is all white, so it almost becomes invisible. I can't even remember what it's called. And then I made this piece right after, thinking, because I didn't want to stop working on that piece, So instead, I had to stop, and I just started over again, but then as if the piece grew into a new form. So I could, eventually, like in 40 years, line up 6 pieces like this, and it would like be like an animation.
I have a question.
Hmm.
Is your aesthetic from growing up or from art school or from...
So Elizabeth is asking if my aesthetic and my sensibility is from art school or growing up, and I think it's definitely from my childhood.
That's what I thought.
Because it's not, and in some ways, like I think that the things that I make are in bad taste, and they're kind of like, I mean, in some ways I think of them as, it's just also 20 years old. I think of it as a little subversive, like making art objects that are falling apart. I'm from North Carolina, where everyone in my family saves every single thing that's ever crossed their path and has some sort of plan for it or memory attached to it. And so, like, everybody has like a shed in their house built of like, 3, bricolage junk. And all this time, I'm still making those paintings because I won't give up. And around this time, I was already toying with this, but because I was already influenced by artwork that depicted mythology, but I just embraced it. Because I wanted to be very specific and tether these forms to ideas and specific metaphors that people could relate to emotionally. So this piece is called The Invention of Drawing, the Hanging Garden. And it's double-sided, and it's actually, the title is 2 myths. One is about the hanging gardens of Babylon. So the king built the queen a hanging garden in the form of a mountain so that he could remind her of the landscape of her childhood and hold on to her where in their new home, her new home. So it's like a monument to love. And then that's this side. And then the other side is the invention of drawing, and it's a story, a myth about the first drawing where the daughter of a ceramicist, her lover was going off to war, and the night before he left, she mixed water with the clay and traced his silhouette by candlelight on the wall. So as a way to hold on to him when he was gone. And I thought they were both ways that art making is, which is the way I think about it. It's like a way to you address a lot of societal issues, formal things, but it's also about love.
I have another question.
Mm-hmm.
Is most of your drawings about love, society, a lot of it's Greek mythology?
We'll wait for that one.
Like, when you wake up and you go, what am I going to do today?
So she's asking a lot of the subject matter about Greek mythology or this subjects, is it something that I wake up with the intention to think about, or do I arrive at it? Right. Is that kind of it's very organic. So the material process led me to the interest in antiquity. So I basically follow the thread of the ideas that the material labor of my daily practice leads me to. So it's not, in some ways it's, I get to shepherd it, but the sheep go where they will. And I like that. To me, that's more beautiful. It's more like life. This is my mother. She very generously agreed to play Medea in a production I made. Medea killed her children. And, it's really extraordinary. Like, my brother's here, my husband is here. I don't know if he might be with the dogs in the back, but, everybody in my family, these photographs that I initially took, they've just become increasingly elaborate, and you'll see later, like, then I started building sets. So, it really depends on the generosity of a community for me to make these. And this is the piece I made from that photo shoot. So a photograph like that ends up there. But it also is a process that informs the way that I'm thinking about the forms that I make. And this is me, not me, this is my friend in my studio. So that gives you a sense of how messy I am and how organic the process is. I made a whole show about this particular play called Hecuba, which is a Euripides revenge tragedy. And I'm just going to show the images without explaining it, because I'd rather talk about the Bacchae. So this play takes place in the aftermath of the Trojan War. So it's like a depleted culture. It's human sacrifice at the tomb of Achilles. And then after Hecuba, I made a show, actually it's not even a show, I worked for, because I try not to let the relationship to the content be bound to exhibitions, so I worked on the text, the Bacchae, for about 4 years. And basically, I think that I'm kind of performing the work through painting. And these are the photographs that I did initially to just kind of set the tone. Like, this is how it begins. This is my friend Ann Anka in front of a Gottlieb painting in her home, playing Agave. This is Agave. And they became increasingly active. And in the background you see a painting, so I'm starting to use the sculptures and paintings as the set dressing for the photographs. This is my friend who's also known as Angina. This is Semele. And then this is the show that came of those photo shoots. Another show that came of those photo shoots. So this is the images of Anne, then became this 8-foot by 16-foot three-dimensional collage. It's called Agave. And I'm not going to get into the story about the Bacchae, but it's another revenge play. It's incredibly violent. It's like a horror movie. This is Pentheus. He's actually torn limb from limb by his own mother when she's in an altered state. This is also 8 feet by 16 feet. And there's magnifying glasses in the piece so that it trains spotlights onto the work, which I thought was like a miniature theatrical vignette. And you can also look at the figures through the magnifying glasses, which are flexible and movable. And the actual text from the play and all the dialogue that is depicted is also embedded in the collage. So you'll see this ransom note style text. If you were curious to know what's going on, it's all laid out for you.
How long does it take you to start and to finish one piece?
So the question is, how long does it take to finish a work? And it's tricky.
It depends, right?
Yeah, and
Normally, like an average.
ideally, I would like, not that I'm working on it all the time because I work on everything at once. I kind of work the whole room, but for exhibitions and for plays. But I like a piece to kick around for at least a year. It doesn't mean my hands are on it all year, but it takes a good amount of time. This is Dionysus. And at this point, I found 8-inch pins, so it's getting crazier. I'm putting in big objects. And also, I like plays because you can put text in that actually addresses the viewer. So it's not just like literature or theory, but I'm actually talking to, if I'm the actor performing the play, I'm talking to the audience. This is called Eyes That Burn Like Leaping Fire, and it's also a depiction of Agave. I don't cast the play in a singular way. Many people play the same character. This is 20 feet long by 8 feet by a foot deep. And there's a screen of string, multicolored strings hanging in front of it. So I wanted it to be like a horror movie, but also like the Lawrence Welk show. Like I'm always trying to, because I know that what I'm doing is silly. So I like to acknowledge it. And I like camp. This is called The Lightning's Bride. It's 24 feet long. And these blue circles on the edges are magnifying glasses for 50s television sets. And I conceived of this piece almost like an Edward Muybridge time lapse of my friend playing Semele getting struck by lightning, and that's how the play begins. And there's a vignette within that magnifying glass too. And then there's jokes, like those are all, her dress is made of Bryce Marden's, her wound is a Lucio Fontana. This is called The High House Low, and it's the moment that Dionysus destroys the palace of Thebes. So these are the paintings I used as backdrops. And the sculptures were the set dressing. So this represents a thyrsus, which is a symbol in the play. But sometimes within these sculptures there are vignettes or tableaux or little miniature theaters. And then these three sculptures represent the king's three aunts who rip his body apart. So this is Agave, and you'll see in the low here is the rib cage made of a wicker basket. And this is called something like, I can't remember, but it's like she basically rips his arm out. And it's about that moment. And for me, all of these sculptures are about like what if we only had the fringe of her garment and we wanted to display it? This is called tearing flesh from bone. And these are bigger than human size. This is called swarming over. And all of the titles come from direct quotes from the play. So descriptions of vignettes or actions. I'm also going to read this. I'm going to scroll while I go. This is set dressing. In ancient theater, the action most often occurs off stage, out of sight. The chorus sings of what transpired, the tragedy, the loss, the accident, the discovery, the violence, the victory. Occasionally, for the most spectacular or complex displays, a living yet frozen tableau of actors on a platform is wheeled out like a sculptural pantomime. Then, as to not spoil the near photographic ancient conceit, this parade-like wagon float is pulled off again with its characters always immobile. And that's an image of actual, it's my description, those are my words, but it's how ancient theater was performed. So this is a giant mobile that's all the parts are spinning and turning, and then occasionally it coheres into a skull. Yeah, question. So this is actually an eel trap right here, a gazebo turned upside down, lawn chairs, there's the gazebo, and there's the gazebo. And then, let me see, it's basically wire and plastic tubing and pins and mini blinds. I think that's it. I mean, it's trash. So then, after working with antiquity for like 10 years, I decided I wanted to do something modern. So, and modern for me was a play from 1932 called There Is No More Firmament, written by Antonin Artaud, the artist and poet I referenced earlier. And it's a surrealist play that takes place in the distant future of the year 2000, about the end of the world. And it's surrealist, and there are no characters. It's like a roving, it's almost like, the way they describe it is almost like turning the radio dial and not listening to anything, but just constant shifting voices. And each major piece is about a sense of anxiety. And this particular one, I'm sorry, I can't remember titles right now, but this one is about social anxiety, commerce, urban life. This one is existential. It's called Harmonies Cut Short. And the imagery in it is more anthropological, religious, mythological. These are all 8 feet by 8 feet by 12 feet by a foot deep. I call them billboards. I kind of think of them as advertisements for a theatrical production that will never happen. This is called The Plague. This is my friend Teddy. It's the moment in the play where a body is carried past on a stretcher. And everyone's speculating about why he's dying. It's called Dirty Fog. This is about environmental anxiety, contamination. This is called There Is No More Firmament, and it's actually about information anxiety. That's my husband in the top. And then I started making these smaller works to see if I could incorporate that same urgency into something like a smaller world. I included this one. This is like 8 feet by something. Because I also am exploring, in the same way that I want the plays and the text to address the viewer, all these mouths, I want it to, like, you know, in silence, but for you to feel like the paintings are screaming at you. And then this is the little one that's screaming at you. And in this case, I don't know if you can see, but there's these little cutouts. And I want it to feel like there's people behind the painting staring at you.
What's the title of that?
You know, I don't remember the title of this.
What year?
Oh, what year?
Roughly.
2016. So, I mean, in many ways, like, I have a really traditional practice, but I'm always trying to, like, make you just feel like the paintings are performing some way. This one is filled with, it's this, you know, cacophonous crowd fighting, but then it's full of porcelain ceramics embedded in it. So you just feel like it's going to break any second.
And are those drawings yours?
No, my friend gave them to me.
Okay, so that, because they're more caricatural than your gesture.
Wait, is what mine, the drawing? No, the figures, they're blown up collage. So I took a little caricature and blew it up big and then drew over it. And my friend gave me these thrown vases. And then the play was never finished. And we don't know if the world ends or not. And I decided to take that as an opportunity to return to abstraction. So, as if, you know, the world blew up. And this is like the miasma left. And this is the large painting. So at the same time, I'm exploring, this is made by color by number. So I basically took a photograph of those images earlier and then executed a color by number painting and then painted on top of it. So I'm always exploring new ways to like hybridize photography and painting. Again, this is another example of that, putting collage over it. This is called Revolutionary Song. And this was actually I made it directly after the election. And Revolutionary Song is a moment within the play. I don't know if you can see it, but basically it's my husband standing there, backlit in our home. And this is my most recent show at Regan Projects. The show is called A Clearing. It references that piece from 20 years ago. And basically, instead of working from literature, I decided I wanted to like make some focus on materiality and use this excess of things that I've cut out for the past 20 years. So I didn't make new imagery for this for the most part. I just have this like rooms full of all the things that I've cut out. And these are all called clearing. And I thought of it as I'm clearing the mind, I'm clearing my space, clearing the mind like meditation, and a literal physical spatial reference to like a clearing in the landscape, maybe as a metaphor for clearing the mind. And I included these. I found these benches were in my building when I moved in. I bought this building with my husband, and I love them so much, and I decided to cast them in bronze. And then put these bronze sculptures that I made that are, they basically have my handprints in them. And it's a way I wanted to invite people to sit down and look at the paintings, like not necessarily just go up close, but like spend some time at a distance, invite them to stay, and also invite them to handle these small sculptures that I made as a way to like underscore the tactility of the paintings. Because, to me sometimes it's sad that people can't just rearrange the paintings. And at the same time that I made that show, this is the project that Laura was referring to earlier at MoCA. So I curated this exhibition about collage and assemblage. But it's not strictly collage. One room, it's collage not as a working method, but as I should have the words by now. I guess sensibility. This is the only image I have, so it includes all sorts of collage and assemblage from the last century, but also there's a room of painting that is straight painting and printmaking with no collage at all, but the paintings are made in a way where the painter had to collage in their mind before laying the paint down. So removing images from their original context, cutting them up, redistributing them, putting things that don't belong together. And then there's also film montage, Bruce Conner, another film about the Middle East and war in Abu Ghraib, and then photography that's rephotographed. So instead of using glue to put photographs together, the photographer's strategy is to rephotograph groups of photographs, like Lyle Ashton Harris or Richard Hawkins. And I love doing this so much that I'm almost done. So basically, I'm going to read this thing. It's like my next project I'm calling The Balcony by Jean Genet. And because I take pictures of people, this play, I'm just going to read this because it's too complex. The set of Jean Genet's balcony, The Balcony, felt uncannily familiar to me. Madame Irma's balcony is an extravagant brothel, a house of illusion, complete with studio sets, authentic costumes, props, and changing scripts, where clientele can indulge any fantasy, however baroque or banal. Over the course of the play, the tumult of revolution encroaches on this floating world, until an unlikely counter-revolution and puppet-like government emerges from Irma's broken house of mirrors. Citizens who once paid to play act, judge, bishop, and soldier with the help of Irma's seasoned consort now seize the roles in earnest as she herself takes on the role of the remote and unseen queen. In scene 12, Genet sends in the trendiest photographers so the camera can canonize as the queen's envoy looks on a true image born of false spectacle. Over the past 3 years, I have made work about Antonin Artaud's 1902 surrealist end-of-days satire, There Is No More Firmament. It takes place in the distant and futuristic world of the year 2000. Over the course of making that body of work, my subject became the changing object of Artaud's anxiety, threats both real and imagined, suspicions both founded and paranoid. I can imagine Genet's balcony as a vignette in Artaud's collapsing firmament. Genet's text is rich and stacked with imagery. I would like to slip into Irma's silk blouse, buttons on the left, anoint myself a queen, and start a revolution. I'm going to prepare my costumes and my studio for tomorrow. You must go home now, and you can be quite sure that nothing there will be any more real than it is here. And this is my brothel. So I was thinking about that. I'm going to perform the play. Like, that's my idea, to do it just like I've done it. But I was thinking after doing the Mocha show that it could be so much more expansive. And I have this big warehouse, and I don't need it all. And my husband and I are going to start trying to do exhibitions for local artists who we want to support. And it's another way to start a revolution. So that's it. Thank you, everybody. Yeah. Oh, wait, they told me to say this. You need a microphone. Do you mind waiting for the microphone so the people can hear?
So,
Sorry.
hi, Elliott. Looking at your work,
Sorry.
I have this sense that you're hyperly concerned with the future. Is that something you can elaborate in?
Yeah, I mean, I have a great deal of personal anxiety. And that really is about the uncertainty of the future, whether it's direct or collective. So I've decided to embrace the beauty of that anxiety.
So is the chaos a way of dealing with it in a way?
She says, is the chaos a way of dealing with it? And to me, I see the chaos in my work as actually my current perception. And the goal in my work is to cross the line where it is so chaotic that one finds a clearing. That all that noise becomes like a unified field in which one can exist and have one's own thoughts. And do you mind if I do him first since he started?
So, Elliott, I didn't know that you had created original collage elements with photography, and I was wondering, between that and the appropriated elements from, books, magazines, things like that, is there some of each in every piece, and is there does sometimes the personal work take over, or the collage elements themselves? I was wondering what the ratio
personal,
is. Yeah, the things you shot and things.
It's always he's asking about the relationship between the personal imagery and the found imagery, and it's always a different ratio. I think some are exclusive. And I always try to resist formula. So I've tried to do it all, mix it all. And I try to allow myself the freedom to, even if I've set a parameter, break it.
I'm very impressed with the breadth of your work and openness. And I was wondering if you ever considered having someone film your performance as you do your work. Because you said you work on things all at the same time. That would be fascinating. And also, I want to know how many hours a day you spend in your studio.
So I have had people bring a camera in. It didn't feel it didn't feel like it normally feels. You know, it didn't feel authentic to me, but it did give a sense of it. Like there was an Art 21 piece done, and then there was actually a good thing created by this sunglasses company called Persol, where they did time lapse, and that was fascinating for me to watch. And I keep pretty regular hours. I find that like I stay up late and I wake up late. But I like to work as much as possible because it actually keeps the pressure away. I don't have to worry about succeeding. Does that make sense? Because I just trust that over the course of however many hours, something will happen. And I generally try to work a good 8-hour day in whatever form. You're welcome. Yes. There's a mic. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, a number of your pieces are large. Do you map them out before you start working on them? It happens organically.
I never map them out. Like it is, for me, the opposite. Because I want to not know where I'm going, and I want to like be listening to the process move along.
So I'm just curious. They're so beautiful, the sculpture pieces especially, and they're so fragile. And I can't help but think of them as children. And I worry, do you work with a conservator? Or do you think about how they'll live out in the world? Because they're so fragile and
Well,
beautiful and beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, this is by design. Like, I want. That's the ideal response. Like, I want your response is my goal. Like, I want you to feel like you want to take care of it. And also because it looks like it's going to fall apart. I obviously don't want them to fall apart, and I try to secretly I glue every pin. I do all these things to ensure that they're not going to fall apart, but they seem like they could at any moment. And the other thing that I've done, which I realize now that I'm older, I kind of have befriended every registrar in LA, and because I really admire their work, but also it's like they're a good resource. Like, so sometimes I'll call them, I'll be like, what's your limit? And it's been helpful.
And just one other, the ones with the tissue paper.
Mm-hmm.
There was that painting that was both
Mm-hmm.
sides. Again, I'm curious, what was the paper?
Mm-hmm.
And does it hold up?
So she's asking about the double-sided work on the very thin paper that looks like tissue paper. It's actually a really sturdy Japanese paper that's archival. So, yeah, I've figured out ways to like make things look like they're trashier than they are. Yeah, the microphone's coming.
Do you need help with your gallery?
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah. I mean, it's going to, I think that, like, the idea that my husband and I have is to have it actually be in our home and be really, you know, not commercial, not just, like, about living and about communal, like if we were to have a dinner, it would be a potluck dinner, you know, like that kind of evolving thing. So yeah.
So in addition to the previous question, how stressed are you on transportation on those arts? I mean, to museum and galleries. I imagine how much you have to put to protect that.
I mean, I
art.
basically just use the standard way to ship stuff. So you build a crate and it's kind of floating there in the crate. So like I just make sure that the pieces can function in the systems that we have physically. And they do. Anybody else? Well, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it.